Good morning. Uh, this is Dr. Obitashaka. This is the Dr. Obitashaka show. Um, we were scheduled this morning to have a conversation between myself and Professor Kaba Kamene on the Twa or Anu role in African and world civilization. Due to some kind of mix-up, Professor Kamene is not able to appear at this time, so we'll have him on at another time. And so my topic for today is going to be common features between Twa, the Twa and African American people and culture, and also ancient Kemet. And then I'm going to put some focus on the webinar that will be starting soon. And we've had a number of people already sign up. We need more, and we're going to need time for preparation and stuff. So there's going to be a time where people will be getting notice and information on this webinar. And today I want to go into some of the reasons for the webinar, what the webinar will be able to do in terms of helping people with identity, issues of identity, and also healing that we know is important for our people. But this is important not only for our people in this country, in the US, but globally. So it's important for Africans in the diaspora, in Europe, in Britain and France, wherever they are, the Caribbean and Africa, because we've all been hit by issues, the issues of colonialism and slavery. And since 1968, the post-hostile external forces that have hit our community. So that will be a part of the focus of today's show for people who just tuned in. The scheduled interview with Brother Kaba and the discussion we're going to have on the Anu role on African and world civilization. Something went wrong, and we'll have that rescheduled. So the two topics for today is looking at the ways in which the Anu impacted African American culture and people, and the way in which it impacted Africa, but especially Kemet. I just wanted to get up underneath that and then go into some reasons for the webinar that we're planning. And we've had a good response from a number of people so far that have indicated an interest in the webinar. And we'll keep people posted on what we do, because there'll be a number of preparatory things that'll happen and a number of things we'll be doing to prepare people for this before it starts. So again, Brother Kaba won't be on today. Something came up at the last minute. So you know how that is. So I usually do a lot of pre-planning, but we all come out of African-American culture, so we know how to do the other thing too. And there's also planning in it, but it's what we call spontaneous organization. So you're going to get some of that today. Last night, I had the privilege of attending the birthday party of a very beautiful sister, Janae Johnson, who is a healer in the Black community. She's by way of New York. She's been in Oakland a long time. She's raised a beautiful son. And I'm privileged to have her as a spiritual daughter. She told me she wants to be my spiritual daughter. I said, yeah, fine, because she's one of my favorite people. What impresses me about people is their genuineness and their love for self and their people. And she's been doing a lot in the Black community to raise up, especially sisters, young sisters who have had issues around parenting and stuff and probably had troubled family lives. And so she ran a mentoring center in San Francisco. It was an African-centered system for young sisters. And she had me come out and speak a number of times, and we became close. So she's going to be on this show in the future, and we're going to be doing some collaboration together. So I just wanted you to prepare you for this. She's a real beautiful sister, but as beautiful as she is on the outside, tremendously beautiful on the inside. She's full of love. So I want to say to her, happy birthday, which we said to her last night. I went to a dinner that was full of female power. My wife was with me, and she's one of these strong sisters as well, and I really enjoyed it. And to her son as well, happy birthday. I also want to give a plug. I have a former student. His name is Alton Rentz. He was a teaching assistant for me at San Francisco State, as well as taking a number of my classes. And he has set up a coffee business in the Bayview Hunters Point. And what he's planning to do is set up a series of coffee shops around the country. And this guy is a really nice young man. He attended both of my birthday parties, and he just helped me out a lot with computer technology. He's a computer master. So he has done training in the Hunters Point for Black males who are young, teenagers, early 20s, trained them in computer technology, free. And he's prepared them for entry into high-tech jobs. And he's also run a program at San Francisco State where I taught for 40 years. And this is a program for ex-offenders, brothers who are coming out of prison. He has offered his services training them in computer technology, free. So he set up this business, Talio's coffee, high-end coffee. He's come up with his own formula for his coffee. It beats anybody else's. And so I encourage people to check out the internet and get his address, but it's in the Bayview Hunters Point, Tallio, Tallio coffee, and show him some love. And this is one of the things we're going to be doing on this show is talking about how we revitalize our communities, and economic development is one of the key things, along with revitalizing our people. And that's what the sister I was referring to earlier is dealing with in terms of healing. So I'll be dealing with two things this morning, since the guest won't be on today, P.A.P.O. One will be on the commonalities between the Twa and African Americans and Kemet, and then focusing on why the webinar that will be going on soon. And we got it, as I pointed out earlier, a number of people have signed up for it. So over 3 sessions, I went into the Twa and the Anu. And today, P.A.P.O. was going to share some of his views on that. He'll do that at another time. He's written a book on the Shabaka stone, and he introduces it with my general thesis on the Twa role as being the creators of formative African history. And then he integrates that into looking at ancient Kemet. So I thought to add something, a different dimension today, is to look at what features of the Twa do we find among African Americans and also African people in general, but specifically African Americans, because there are some particular qualities that apply to us, and then generally to Africans in general. And of course, because they gave birth to world civilization, they're the world's first people, to humanity. So you're going to see some things that apply to all human beings. I pointed out before, in looking at African American culture, that due to the furnace of slavery, to the heat of oppression, we faced a circumstance different from the Caribbean. They both faced horrendous slavery. So I'm not saying ours was harder, theirs was. Same people doing it in both places, vicious. What was different in the US from the Caribbean is we were not the majority on the land. And so, as I pointed out before, in the Caribbean, you could drop African culture into the Caribbean. But in the United States, there had to be a real fight for us to hold on to our culture. So I call this the recreation of African culture here, that I call New African culture. We drew on central principles of Africa, and we inserted new ones. And our package often looked different because of the way things went down in this country. We had to do Brer Rabbit, which is this figure that comes out of Africa, this little rabbit that outfoxes the fox. And so that became symbolic for the African American, Brer Rabbit, using your wits. Whereas in the Caribbean, it was Anansi the spider that would create this spider web, and entangle you. Here, we entangled our oppressors with our wits. And so using our wits, we created a new African culture, new African art form. And we also had to fight the external forces that we're still fighting, the legacies of slavery. They still live with us. But what we've often ignored is the culture that we gave birth to. And a lot of our people are embodiments of this. The sister whose birthday party I went to last night, she's an example of that. Her mother came, she's 80, I think 87. She came in, she's 87 years old. And you could see that the love that her daughter had, where it came from. And of course, she came in here with that. So we have had this quality among our people of producing some very strong people in spite of enslavement. And so we've had some very strong families that have gone on in spite of this. We're always just looking at the negative, but we had some very strong families. And so in this fire and the flame that we faced, that put us in the position of working to create a new African culture, a new ethos was formed. And I pointed this out to you before. Ethos is how you carry yourself, your way of life, your design for living. You can see ethos in a people's face. I can tell a continental African from an African American. It's in their face, It's not the color of their skin or the shape of their features, it's in their attitude. You can see it in their face. You can also see it in their eyes, And every people have an ethos. The ethos, if I pointed out before, of Kemet, the way they carried themselves was ma'at, I pointed out the ethos of white people is arbitrariness. You think it's white supremacy, but we're going to their culture. White supremacy, a term I don't use, but racism, that's a term that they concocted and a mentality as they came into relationship with people of color, mainly African people and then other people. And then you had a toxic blend of their culture, which we haven't studied, and what a lot of you call white supremacy or racism. When you put this toxic blend together, then genocide is generally, or slavery or something very vicious, is the potion. When they go up against each other, because whites have fought each other, then it's the cultures against cultures, and they're basically the same. And the essence of their Aryan culture, and I've talked about Aryanism before, Lord and Master, the essence is control. But there's a whole lot to it. We'll go into that later. So when you blend that with viewing people as being savage and inhumane, then you have a recipe for genocide or slavery. They were pretty rough on each other. And the ruling group among their people, rough on their own people. They have very little concern for them. But when you add that to the mix of coming in contact with Native Americans, coming in contact with Africans, coming in contact with Asians, other people of color, then it's a toxic mix. So in the US, as we come under the forge and flame of slavery, enslavement, due to the dynamics, the numerical dynamics, where while we had a majority in places like South Carolina and near majorities in some other parts of the country, in some parts of the South, in the United States as a whole, they had overwhelming power. And when they have overwhelming power, they do whatever they want to do. That's arbitrariness combined with racism. So this led us to forge a new ethos, but it's an ethos that resembles the Twa. And so I pointed out to you before what that ethos is. I studied y'all carefully, as carefully as I studied the Kemites, in fact, more so, because this is us. And our ethos is creativity. That's us. We don't like to do the same thing the same way twice. We don't like to repeat ourselves. That's how embedded the ethos is in us. And when you see Blacks rise, creativity is at the foundation. And then there are systems, because last week, Brother Robert was asking, do we have systems for healing? One of the systems that we have is a mastery system carried out of Africa. It's an apprenticeship system. This refines our creativity. This takes the creativity to the highest level. So creativity is the essence of the African American. And it's such an essence that we sometimes take it for granted. Martin Luther King, when he was making the comments from the interviews, the comments made by Brother Manu Ampin, he just matter-of-factly said, it was matter-of-factly, well, we Southerners, Southern Blacks, we creatively came up with ways to defeat segregation. That was matter of fact. That's a big deal. You know what I mean? But creativity is a matter of fact for us, but we should never take it for granted, especially when it's not only expressed in playing a horn or singing a song or dancing or, acting or something like that, but it's acting upside your enemies' heads and you're walking all over them and you're successful. But it's due to your creativity. And so this is the ethos of the African American. We have a saying, I would rather be the worst innovator than the best imitator. That's our byword. Imitation plays a role in shaping mastery, the way a baby is shaped by a mother. You imitate your mother at the first stage. But then as you enter the world, then what you're supposed to do is find your own voice. And so imitation is the pathway to creativity, but we don't like to see a grown person stuck on sounding like somebody else. And we particularly don't like our people sounding like another people, So that's why in enslavement, enslaved Blacks saw themselves as a cultural nation. And in defining brainwashed Blacks, house slaves, not all, but some, they called them no nation. And then they used that N word that we're not going to use. But they were accurate in saying that if someone had not embraced their Blackness, had come to identify with their master more than they identified with themselves, they were no nation, meaning they wanted to be white, but whites would never accept them. And they didn't want to be Blacks. So they would, reject Black people and find themselves in a position in no man's land. That's where Clarence Thomas is now. And that's why the sixfold stages to mental freedom is so important. The webinar that we're going to be doing is it clearly erases from a confused person's mind the issue of identity. There's no way you'll go through this, but this is voluntary. It's nothing we do that's magical in that you're forced to do it. You have to make the decision yourself, but it creates a set of circumstances, the way in which this works. It's a good chance that you'll move from the no nation to your nation, the Black nation, the cultural nation, the political and social nation. Believe it or not, you have that. Nation is basically what people have in common. And basically, we're in America, but as the old people used to say, not of it, So this ethos of creativity is at the soul of us. It's at the heart of us. And it's one of the most common features we share with the Twa, because if you look at the Twa, and this is true of African people at large, because we are descended from different ethnic groups, some of us Yoruba, Asante, mixtures of different things. I told you my people on both sides, Madagascar. But the point is, all of those have a Twa foundation up underneath them. And when you go into Yoruba culture, dig down deep, you will see at the foundation and even on the surface, you see the Twa, family structure, a host of other things, spirit beliefs, a host of other things, how they govern themselves, a host of other things. But for us, there's a special affinity with the Twa, and that affinity has to do with a lot of things. And in this particular case, the creativity that's manifested by the African in America, in part, is enhanced by the fact that we're not in a nation of our own. And not being in a nation of our own, we're not experiencing, even though we're experiencing the oppression that is coming from the whites, we're not up under governments that may be doing the same thing to us. And so there's a lot of freedom that we have under oppression when it comes to not being restricted by nation states that look like us but aren't for us. And so there's a wild and woolly characteristic of the African in America, but it comes from unrestrained creativity. Even though the system doesn't like this creativity, it's expressed. And the Anu, or the Twa, that's the essence. I mean, if you want to talk about one of the most important qualities they have, it is the quality of having created. They are the first human beings, so we can say God created them. And then from them, they're the seed people for humanity. But they innovate civilization. They create it. Innovation is creating the new stuff because they're the first to create civilization. And by civilization, we mean highly civil people. And then, as we've seen before in looking at ancient Kemet, the fundamentals of what historians call civilization, which is cities, which is structures, which is developed systems of knowledge. In the case of African people, high spirituality and so forth. But generally, the fundamentals of civilization is to be civil and civilized, and they are among the most civil and civilized people on the planet. And they are the models of this, but they are the essence of creativity. And so this is a feature that the African in America shares with the Twa. Creativity is our essence. It comes out of circumstance, but it is basically the same, except we didn't innovate world civilization, they did. So this is a key commonality. the point I was just making about us not coming out of nation state, which would be a good thing if we did, but since we don't, there are some values to that too. And one of the values is we're kind of the wild and woolly element within this society and can get out of control from time to time. And one of the reasons is that as a people, and this is a Twa characteristic, and African people at large share this globally, but they find themselves under what the Caribbean people call heavy manners, the manners of the army and the police and stuff like that, trying to keep us down in Africa and in some other parts of the world. And certainly here they try to, but we tend to be rebellious. And so one of the other common features of African Americans that is a Twa feature is we don't like hierarchy. That means we don't like structures. We don't like structures that are over us. We don't like structures that are telling us what to do. We don't like that. And you can see that in a lot of different ways. A lot of us, when we misread the impact of Christianity on Blacks in this country, we don't know that Blacks were not Christians in slavery. We made the choice to build institutions that we call Christian after slavery, but on our own terms. And that we dropped into the Black church. We're going to go into that at another time. But one of the things we did, we made selective choices about which terminology we would use. In determining what we call a particular spirit system that we call Christian. But we're going to see later a little bit different. And so we picked those things that put us in charge. So at the end of slavery, most Blacks did not pick African Methodist Episcopal because it had hierarchy. Now that was the Church of Free Men of Color and Women of Color that Richard Allen set up, and it's a very good church for a lot of reasons, but they picked their bishops. And most importantly, they picked their ministers. And Blacks ain't going to be a part of that for the most part. One reason why the Nation of Islam was small, though disciplined, was it was hierarchical, top down. Blacks don't like that. We like to be in charge. That's your Twa legacy. And Africans in general share that. We're not the only ones. It's just that they're under lockdown. In many parts of Africa, you got these dictators up there, trying to impose their will on the people. Some parts of the Caribbean, but in many parts of the Caribbean, there's a little bit more free expression, but you have that there too. And of course, this government does that here, but we tend to be resistant and rebellious from time to time, at very important times. So we like a say-so in everything we do. That's a Twa feature. And that is a feature that all African people share. And if Africans are going to go forward in the world, then those features are going to have to be at the foundation of whatever we do, because we have to reconstruct African governance in Africa. For it to work, people are going to have a say-so. If there's ever continental African unity and we need it, then a lot of decisions are going to have to be decentralized, because everything in the end is local. Everybody lives in a particular area, that's local. And your economy is going to grow on a local level. So people are going to have a say-so at that level if economies are going to grow. China works differently. They come out of an emperor system. But even when Deng Xiaoping, who was the innovator for China in the 70s, who took them off on this growth period, even he decentralized in a country in which emperors rule. And the leader of China now rules like an emperor. He has a few people he consults, but basically 1,400,000,000 people in China are moving on the concept of Li, L-I, order. That's their culture. That ain't our culture. You hear me? For us, it's justice. It's got to be right. You know what I mean? And we got to have a say so. So this is a feature of African American people. And if we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, they're a reflection of that. You know, everybody having a say so. Or if you look at the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they were following Ella Baker's rule of group-centered leadership. That's twilight. That's our culture. That comes out of hunter-gatherer societies where there were no leaders. Everybody had a say-so. Consensus was the rule. I told you in the movement I led, San Francisco Freedom Movement, our decisions were by consensus. That was based on my recommendation, and I was chair because I didn't want to make mistakes. I don't like making mistakes. And so everybody had to agree to policy, who'd we fight. And if everybody wasn't on board, we didn't do it. And that's the African way. And we gave birth to that. That's called democracy. It didn't occur in Greece. I pointed this out before. So this is a feature of the African American. If you look at our art forms, they follow that same principle. There's a requirement of excellence to be a part of them, whether you're a musician, a poet, whatever, you know, your artistic skill is, but then you have the freedom to do what is the hallmark of our culture, improvise. And the highest form of it, innovate, which very few people are able to do because that takes a level of discipline and a whole lot of things. Only 2 or 3% in any field are innovators. And that's the book I'm finishing now on, you know, 7. So this feature of non-hierarchical, meaning not having structure over you, having a say-so, that's in the nature of our people and it's in the nature of our culture. The African woman has inherited this, and the African American woman. And the African American woman and the African woman in general, but the African American woman has constructed her own sense of femininity. And that sense of femininity has nothing to do with walking behind her man or being the other half of the man or being voiceless. The African American woman, femininity, is based on her carriage and carrying herself as a woman with all the beauty and sensitivity and all of that, and with strength. And that is a quality that has been forged here, but it's a quality of African women worldwide. And as I pointed out before, in Africa, the African woman has been marginalized, put to the side by colonialism. And so she's the main producer of agricultural goods, but she's the one least likely to profit from it. Both the men and women are ripped off by what's called now neo-colonialism or neoliberalism or various forces of the West, where they come in and take your stuff and pay you very little for it. But she's the primary producer. She's hurt more. And then with colonialism, in comes patriarchy and the mentality that many of her men pick up. And so, you know, men start exercising some arbitrary power over women that they don't like, they rebel against, they have differences with. And so, as Malcolm said, you measure the level of African people by the level of the African woman. If the African woman is raised up high, then you will see African people high up in terms of prosperity. That's the only way we go forward. And that's not putting the man down. The man is automatically assumed he's going to have his say so. If the woman doesn't have hers, you're in a world of trouble because our cultures are wired this way. Europeans are not. So you saw more white women come out and vote for Trump in this election than in the previous one, and he's given them more reason not to vote for him, just as he did in the first election, where he did everything but rape a woman on television. And they went out and voted for him. But that's their culture. That's their daddy they're looking up to. I have a friend who has a friend In fact, it's my first wife's niece, Leisha. She's a beautiful young lady. I raised her for 1 year. Nice sister, real smart. And she had a white friend. And one day the white friend was talking about Trump, which Lisa didn't want to hear. And then it slipped out and he called him, or referred to him as her king. Now that's the daddy figure maximized, because the rulers in Europe who had their own power are coming off of patriarchy. So in the home, the man rules, and then at the national level, one man rules. So that's the view of a lot of white people about Trump. Yeah, he ain't all that smart. Yeah, there's a lot of things that he says, but hey, he's sticking it to him for us. You know what I mean? And surprisingly, how many white women back that position? A majority. It's a minority that don't. So the African woman, the African American woman, the African woman generally exudes strength. But coming under slavery and coming under colonialism, you get this patriarchal stuff coming up. And so you have a conflict in Black families. And so you've got some families where there's real respect, men for women, women for men. And you've got some where the man figures he has to have the final say so. In most of those situations where the sister may love the man and she may act like she's going along with it, it's passive aggressive in most situations. She's going along with it, but at the same time, she's not. And in the end, she's the one that's got the final say so in a lot of cases. When I was doing my research on African families from the mother principle, I would go into, I interviewed people in Africa, on their family systems, and I'd ask them questions about who was in charge. And it would always be the male. Oh, the male's in charge. But then I'd ask the question differently. I'd say, it was a question designed to really look at how were decisions made, as opposed to who was in charge. That's abstract. I'm the man, I'm in charge, right? And so then I would ask, well, on this issue, blah, blah, whatever it was, how was that decision made? And then he would say, I would come home and my wife would tell me 1, 2, 3, and 4 need to happen. And then I would tell my family 1, 2, 3, and 4 had to happen. I said, yeah, okay, you're in charge, huh? Okay. But to the extent that we bought into this idea that one end should be running things, then we have put ourselves in a trap, because that trap is going against our nature. And one of the things, the key thing about love is people have to be free to be themselves, to say what they want to say, do what they want to do. You know what I mean? Because the assumption is you've married somebody you can respect. So you know that what they're going to do will be all right. You don't have to be monitoring them. So the construction of femininity is inseparable from masculinity, meaning within the feminine is the masculine. And the structure and the construction of masculinity has strong feminine elements in it, in that the men that Black women hold in the highest regard are men who they have high respect for, but men who are kind. This is the general thing that I find with sisters when they talk about men, whether the relationship is hard or easy, they will say, he's kind. That's the key thing, kind. And then, of course, they want to see other things: intelligent, hardworking, responsible, somebody that keeps their word, a whole lot of things. Someone that will cover their back, that girls will say, Daddy. When you hear that, that's a man. You know what I mean? Huh? So that construction of womanhood and manhood has a Twa root. And that goes back to my book, Return to the African Mother Principle, of male and female equality that I call not matrilineal or patrilineal, last name from the mother, the father's family, not matriarchy ruled by women, not patriarchy ruled by men, but twinlineal, meaning that when it comes to inheritance, you inherit through the lineage of both mother and father, grandmother and grandfather. But it means also when it comes to empowerment, masculine and feminine, male and female. So up underneath the construction of definitions of manhood and womanhood inherent in us, the strongest constructions, the best ones, have this twinlineal thing. We don't call it that. We're not theoretical. You know, what we do is it's based on action. It's based on what we think is right by doing it. Speak truth, do truth. It's based on the action. But that's what you have. You have that balance. And of course, nothing's ever perfect. So at the very heart of the construction of manhood and womanhood among African people in general, and African Americans in this particular case, there is this strong Twa feature. And the African American woman has some real strengths. She's going to let you know exactly what she thinks. And if you are a real man, you want to hear it. Because what you want to hear is the truth. And the same thing with the sisters. When the brothers got something to say, you want to hear it. Because the person that loves you, they're the ones that are going to be most honest with you. And sometimes honesty is not what we're looking for. In other words, it might not be what you want to hear. But if it's going to help you, open those ears up. And if it makes sense to you, act on it. The same thing with Black fathers. One of the key qualities of Black fathers in the US is, one, the close relationship. And I know now you have few fathers in the home due to the post-60s forces I've talked about before that have taken a lot of Black men out of the household. But Black fathers have tended to have very special relationships with their daughters. And of course, they automatically provide a good model for men, you know. And in my family, the closest relationship my father had was three of us, a brother, myself, and my sister, who will be on next week. For the next 2 weeks, next week and the following week, we'll be dealing with the Kemetic basis of astrology, astronomy, with the emphasis on astrology. And the reason for this discussion is so that you have more tools to understand the powers that dwell inside of you. And I've been having a number of meetings with my sister, who's a master astrologer, as well as a poet and a healer overall, about this particular show. So that will be a feature for the next two shows. My sister was my father's favorite, and that's normal, you know. She's the girl. And so she knew things about my father the rest of us didn't know, you know. But he showed his vulnerability to her. We didn't see that. We just saw the strength. But he would often admit to her shortcomings, doubts, various things he had because of the close relationship that they had. But Black fathers have a strong tendency to encourage strength among their daughters. They do it, mothers and fathers do it for their sons too. But in a patriarchal society where women are devalued, Africans don't buy that. And in this country, especially African Americans, have had to place a special emphasis on stressing how important it is for their daughters to be strong and to be able to make decisions in their life because of the nature of this society. If not, they'll be preyed upon by white men and sometimes by Black men. And what they have to have is strength to be able to persevere. And so this is a common feature in the relationship of fathers to daughters. And it's a common quality for daughters to say to their fathers, hey, thanks, Dad, for encouraging me to be strong. You know what I mean? And that's a good father. But that is a quality, again, that's a Twa quality, and it's an African quality, pre-colonial pre-enslaved quality, the ancient African, traditional African systems valued women. And as Sheikh Anta Diop said in ancient Africa, no systematic mistreatment of women. You'd better not, because societies were centered around it, but you wouldn't do it, not for political reasons, for spiritual reasons. Mothers are sacred, mothers are sacred. They're the source of life. And so when you define, ask a traditional African, and these are Africans now who still hold on to their values, you ask them, well, what would they consider to be just society? They would say a society in which women, children, and elders are not mistreated. Women, children, and elders. And as I study world history, anytime I come across a people in ancient history where the women are held high up, invariably, I know that's an African civilization, invariably. The first people in Greece, the Pelagian people, those were African people. They held women in high regard. It's the only time in Greece that women were not oppressed. The Etruscans, who are the first people in the area that we call Rome today, Italy, they had high regard for their women, and they did not speak an Aryan language. They're African, That's the quality of African culture. It has a Twa legacy, and then it's bred throughout African civilizations. So this is a common feature coming from the Twa. Now, one of the most common features of African people in general, the African in America in particular, and this is generally a feature that people have noted. And in the last show I did on the Twa and Kemet, I was talking about how religion played a key role in the founding of Kemet, pre-dynastic as well as dynastic. And people call this religiosity, you know what I mean? Now, actually, it wasn't religious because Africans did not practice religion. We were into spirit. Religion's usually a book, there's usually a prophet, there's usually laws or commandments. We didn't have any of these things. And by the way, African morality was not dictated by what others would call religion, which we didn't have. It was dictated by what we thought was right in the way people treated each other. We didn't need any laws to tell us not to lie, not to steal, to share with people. That was basic to our behavior. So that's another feature of us. But the key thing is the Twa were a people of the spirit people. Some historians have called them, or anthropologists, the fathers and mothers of monotheism, which is technically correct in that they come up with this one God concept, but you have to be careful using those words because it suggests that they were into a God who was the dictator, who was in charge to the point that no one else had a say so, and suggesting that they were into religion with books and stuff like that and rules and stuff like that. They are the authors of God, but it is the idea of God as vital force, as energy, as the force that's in everything. That's quantum physics. Their concept of God is perfectly compatible with science. We talked about this before. So it's a spirit science. And so they're a spirit people. And this is the key to why the Twa could be so creative. They could innovate so much. They go down to the primary source, which is God. The Bambara have a concept that they call chain of transmission, Bambara, B-A-M-B-A-R-A, people of Mali. They live in an area close to Dogon country. Malcolm X's grandfather, as I pointed out before, Ajar, was probably Bambara. They were warrior cultivators. They would go to their fields to cultivate their crops and carry their weapons because this was a period of the slave trade. So the Bambara have this idea of chain of transmission. And what this means is that knowledge is transmitted to their people from their first ancestor. And the first ancestor is the source of wisdom because they're closest to God. And so this idea that the people who are closest to God are most wise, they're most ancient. And since they're the first people, the first to come to earth or the first among their people, then of course they're going to be endowed with some spirit wisdom, particularly as they get older. So the Twa are really, in the chain of transmission of humanity, the first people who have the first contact with God. And so they're the source of wisdom. And wisdom in Africa is, first of all, supernatural. It's dealing with the higher mind. But that higher mind is also dealing with matter. In other words, the spirit ideas that they have are brought down to earth and make life better. So I pointed out before, the Twa give birth to the invention of fire, to iron making. They also give birth to astronomy and to medicine. I'm going to go into medicine in a minute. So when you're piping into the higher mind, and the Twa were doing it on a regular basis, you're kind of like George Washington Carver. I mean, he was such a great scientist because he was piping into God's mind all the time. The Twa were doing that. And what was the key to their ability to do it? Not only that they were first, but they were just. They call themselves pure people. They still have that quality, though some have, not as just as their original ancestors were. Many of them still are, but they have faced a lot of forces. Slavery, colonialism, most of them didn't experience slavery, but some did, but they experienced the impact of colonialism on the neighboring Africans who then didn't treat them so well. So spirit is at the foundation of the Twa. It is of their essence. And so African civilizations have the characteristic that is ancient and pre-colonial or traditional African civilizations. They all have the characteristic of being spirit-based, all of them. And that's key to how the societies work. It does not mean that they ignore the material. The African has one of the strongest business traditions of any people on the planet. And because of that, Africans prospered under a communal order where everyone shared. But spirit was at the key of this. And so Kemetic civilization was a spirit civilization. If we look at the African in America, spirit is key to the African being, but it's true in the Caribbean, it's true of Africans in Africa and the diaspora. It's a common thing you'll hear the African Americans say, I'm sure, around the world. I can be in a place where people are talking and I'll hear a sister say, baby, the spirit told me this. I don't know how many times in the course of a day I'll say it. There was a time where I used to not say it, but once I got myself spirit grounded, then the same thing for me. So spirit is real key. Our music is grounded in spirit. The foundation of African-American art form is spiritual blues. You call it the spirituals, but it's actually the spiritual blues because there's more blues and the spirituals than the spirituals, meaning there's more stuff about everyday life in the spirituals than there is about heaven. And usually when they're talking about heaven, they're talking about escaping and getting some freedom on this earth. If they sang, you can have this world, but give me Jesus, they meant you can have the world of slavery, give me the good ship, Jesus. That's the ship we came over on to get me out of here. You know what I mean? Well, that could be a code word. So spirit is in the music. By the way, the Twa give birth to the counterclockwise dance that is said to heal the earth. And the Twa believed that God was partial to music. And the spirituals were always sung to dance, and that's called the ring shout, the counterclockwise dance, where you didn't move, you didn't take your feet off the ground, you shuffled them. All over Africa, you see that dance. And so in the spiritual blues, dance and music went hand in hand. And our music has a vibratory force in there that's healing. And it's grounded in the spiritual blues. One art form, that is the spiritual blues, would give rise to this whole complex art form, would give rise to the blues, which are the spirituals, would give rise to jazz, would give rise to gospel blues, would give rise to soul, rhythm and blues, funk, hip hop, would give rise to Black theater production, would give rise to Black artistic painters production and everything, poets and everything else. So all of this has this vibratory spirit force up underneath it. Speech, the key principle, one of the key principles in African culture is the word, the spoken word. And it's the vibratory power of the word. And in African American culture, the word is most valued. The spoken word always above the written, but we gave birth to writing. Writing generally follows speech. So Medu Neter, God's speech in ancient Kemet, and Medu Nefer, human speech, it was called a walking, talking, doing language. And so when writing was put down, when you had writing, the writing followed speech. It was dramatic. So again, speech is full of spirit. And in Africa, one reason why the oral speech is preferred over the written, though we are writers as well, is because of the power in the speech. It's the vibratory force, which is that force that's God that is within us. And it's expressed when we're speaking the truth, when we're living the truth. That's what moves people. So speech is spirit-based. And then of course, dance. What does dance come from? Vibrations. You feel stuff and you move. Other people who copy our dances, they're copying the outside. They're looking at how we move. And so a period of time, they get a little bit less mechanical and they know how to shake their hips a little bit. But the shaking of the hips for us, or the moving of any part of the body, is coming from the force within, the vibratory force, the feeling that is within. And that's why Fool's Crow said that God was a sucker for music because it's vibratory, so this is real key. African humanism has been central to African culture. A lot of us talk about we need to heal and we need to restore our humanity. Well, we got so much humanity that we could lose. I pointed out before, if we lost 90% of it, we'd still have more than most people have. And that's because we come out of a society that is humane at its core. We think that's natural for all cultures. No, it's not, and especially not for European culture. I pointed out before, ethics are not a part of their worldview. And that is, of course, key to kindness and everything else. And it's not based on rules necessarily. It's based on what's inside of you, the feeling, the compassion you have for human beings. So African-American culture has shared this, this humanism. These external forces that have hit us is weakening this materialism, individualism. One of the mantras of the Twa, and it's a mantra I live by, and I know a lot of you do, is not to love material things. Our parents have taught us people first. People mean more than anything material. We all get tested in life. I've had situations where a family member did in something I really liked. I mean, did it in. I had a car In fact, I still have it. I'm a certain kind of car I like to drive. And this particular family member messed it up on the outside. It had to be completely repainted because it was black. You know what I mean? But I didn't love this car. I liked it. You know, I'm into sports cars, by the way. And it's not because I'm into a second childhood. I like things that are fast. I like things that are beautiful. I like sports cars. That's me. And I've been doing it since my 30s. So don't profile me with this white psychology. I know it's true that there are men, especially a lot of white men, who are out there to get their second childhood. I've always been an old child. My father called me uncle. I pointed this out before, when I was a year old, because I'm serious. You know what I mean? But I was a kid, you know. But family member didn't, you know, scratch the black sports car. You know what I mean? And when you scratch black, you have to take all the paint off. So I didn't like it. But she was amazed that I didn't get real angry at her or anything because I'm not invested in material things. Yeah, I liked the car, that was it. But I ain't got no love for nothing material. If you can't love me back, I don't love it. Or there's a potential for that. Or it's food. I love good food because it's nutritional. It does good for you. I love Mother Nature because it's our big mama. I love that. You know what I mean? But it loves me back. You know what I mean? So the Twa operated on this principle. You don't love material things. You love people. You love nature. You love God. You love, you know, those things that are essential. You love truth. I love that more than anything, you know, the truth. So this is a Twa feature, but it's embedded throughout African culture. But African American people, or new Africans, African people in this country, this humanism is key, and it trumps materialism. But we know now, with the external forces that have hit us since '68, we have some of us who will put money before everything. Human life means very little. We have entered into a dead realm when you enter that realm, if that is your first value, because money won't hug you, money won't love you. And it certainly is not a key to happiness. And a lot of us, when we talk about healing, a lot of us have trouble enjoying internal peace. And one of the reasons for this webinar is to look at and to understand how, when we know ourselves, you know, we develop a deep sense of love for ourselves, but also internal peace, internal harmony. And you might say, how do you do that with all this white racism? Well, because inside of you, you got a force inside of you. And that force is not broken. That force is whole. And when you're in tune with it, especially when you know, respect, and love yourself, then you know, you're able to experience this internal peace. I experience it all the time. And my favorite time is in battle. I'm peaceful. Oh, I've got you laid out. You're finished. You know what I mean? Now we're going to do this move and that move because I want it to be pretty. I don't want this ugly victory. I just trained some students a couple of years ago in how to win a particular battle that was real rough. And the main thing is we taught them how to do it pretty and to do it in such a way that their opponent didn't even know what happened. Hit them so fast, boom, you know, and they did it. They're smart, a bunch of young sisters and brothers, you know, I mean, but peace, even when you're at war, if you're in harmony with yourself, you're at peace, you know, and that comes from loving yourself. The sixfold stages to mental freedom will be part of what can help you with that. Some of you already have that. But if you don't, and I understand if you don't, there's a lot of things to make you angry. For example, nothing wrong with being angry. Nothing wrong. And in fact, in the sixfold stages to mental freedom, there's a stage particularly where anger is going to be predominant, and it's a good thing. It's just that you don't want to be in that stage all your life. Because that stage just keeps you in a tense situation. You don't want to be in that stage. But when it's a natural thing, when it comes as a result of you seeing what your enemy has done to you and your people, it comes from compassion, from concern, or whatever reason it comes from, then anger is a good thing. Let it out. Just make sure that you're in control of it. It doesn't put you in positions where you're going to get hurt, or you do something to people you're going to regret. But anger can be a weapon that you can use, So that's some of what I'd say about the Twa and the way in which we manifest Twa qualities as a people. And when we're talking about revitalizing our families and our communities, I think this is key. But the key point is you're getting down to the roots of civilization and the roots of history. And when you do that, then what you have is the basis for something to stand on that can make you stronger. And it's a question of appreciating what you have inside of you and drawing from it. I just want to say a few things about the Twa impact on Kemet internally, some things that we didn't talk about before, just a few. And then I want to get into the webinar and we can have any questions that people have. We've looked at the Twa role in being the first human beings and founding civilization throughout the world. And then we looked at them as the founders of pre-dynastic Kemet. And then we looked at the religious role or the spiritual role in setting up Kemetic civilization. So the question is, so what are some of the ways in which the Twa were of central influence inside this civilization? Well, one is there is this tradition in Africa, because all governance systems in Africa spring from families. And these families will usually be extended families, and then lineages, and then clans. And then later, some people go to the level of kingship and queenship, structured societies. But they all have the basis of coming from families. And very often in African civilizations, the head of the nation is the founder. And that's the person that may have founded the land on which the people settled, in which the people came and gathered together. And then if out of this evolves a more highly organized system, kingship, queenship may develop, or it may be a village system. Among the Igbos, that was the case in most cases, or whatever. But the key thing is family is at the foundation. The Twa play in Africa a key role in initiating family heads into a lot of things in terms of how to become civilized and organized. But a key thing that they learn, and the most treasured thing, is how to gain contact with the first spirits of the land, because the Twa are the first in the world and in the first in any particular African society. So if they're not able to maintain contact with the spirits of the land, Africans believe they will not be prosperous. And that was and the Twa are the first spirits of the land. And so the Twa, in addition to initiating Africans into basic qualities of civilization, the main thing they train them in, particularly their leaders, are the rites and rituals, the ways in which you commune with the ancestors. The ancestors are the key guarantee of prosperity, that you'll have children, your crops will grow, that people will prosper. In Kemet, we know the first ancestor was a C.O.R.E. We've gone through this. And this first ancestor was a real human being. We saw a picture of his statue, but his head was found in a jar in Abydos, according to Sheikh Anta Diop. So he was a real ancestor. He was like the ancestral founder along with his wife and sister, Aset. They were the two. She is the mother of agriculture, of corn and things like that. So he represents the institution of pharaohhood. And then, of course, in the religious or spiritual teachings, regeneration, life, death, rebirth, in Kemetic thought. So in ancient Kemet, he's the first pharaoh. Literally, the term pharaoh means great house. But the pharaoh is considered to be God. Remember the picture that I have of the Anu. This great one who's gone to the temple of Amen to worship the god. The god is symbolized by that animal with two ears there in front of this little great one. The god is Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh was considered to be God on earth. But remember, according to the ancient Kemites, we're all gods. And I think it's true. We all have God within. We went through some of this. You have the powers of God within. There's nothing broken in your soul, in your spirit, you know? So Pharaoh, while God on earth, he maintains prosperity by practicing Ma'at. And by practicing harmony, truth, justice, and right order, keeps out disorder, Isfet, I-S-F-E-T. And this maintains order because it's pleasing to God. He's the God on earth, but the great God, Ra, you could call him the sun, but Ra, God. This idea of Pharaoh appeasing God, this is again coming from this Twa notion of, in the beginning, the leader who was the lineage head, and very often in Africa, first among equals, they didn't rule the lineage. Everybody had a say-so in the lineage. That lineage head is the one who's just. It's a key requirement. And therefore in a position to maintain respect in the lineage, but also to maintain order in heaven because they are acting righteously. And so that is the source of Pharaoh. The source of Pharaoh is coming from this access to the spirit, being able to commune with the spirit. And this is the Pharaoh's responsibility. Not all pharaohs did it. Some went off, and that caused an intermediate period in Kemet, breaking down in the 5th dynasty, 6th to the 10th dynasty, this disorder, because the people faced oppression, because these pharaohs went too far. And people rose up, and then they tried to restore a just order in the 11th dynasty. So I'm not giving you a picture of, oh yeah, everything was perfect. No, it wasn't. But the fact is that the source of governance has got a Twa source to it, not just that they founded pre-dynastic Kemet, but the institution of pharaohship. Here we're living in a material society. So the pharaoh is the one who gets, not the pharaoh, but the corporate head or the president is the one that gets the money and gets the power and can manipulate people. So in the case of a C.O.R.E, he's the first ancestor. And so when you have dynastic Kemet, they're going back and trying to draw their power from the spirit of the Twa, and in this particular case, symbolized by a C.O.R.E. Ma'at is, of course, the basis for order in Kemet. The source of Ma'at is Masuri, M-A-A-S-O-U-R-I, which is a Twa term. It means straight, upright, right, just. And another time I'll go into the concept of an ideal human being, but again, it draws from this idea of Ma'at. Kemet and ancient African civilizations were spirit civilizations, spirit-based, but they were spiritual material. spirit, material. In other words, they were out for the well-being of the people. And so spirit was predominant because that's the source of everything. But then at the same time, that needs to produce material prosperity. And ancient Africa, you had a long period of history where Africans lived well and not under hunger, not under oppression. So those are a few commonalities between Kemet. There's a lot more with the Twa. What I want to go into now is this webinar that we're going to be doing and some reasons for it, which will be centered on the sixfold stages to mental freedom. And a number of people have responded, and those that have, I've sent back a little thank you, letting you know that you'll be kept up on how we progress on this. So far, most people who have chimed in have said that they want it twice a month. And personally, I think twice a month would be better than once a month, but we'll go with the majority. If the majority want it once a month, we'll do it once a month. The reason I think twice a month is better is because this is transformation, and transformation takes some time to work on. And while I know the first people enrolling in this, many of them are real conscious, well-read people, and they've got their consciousness together. So the question would be, what's the good of this for you? None of us are perfect. And the key thing about this sixfold stages to mental freedom is it gives us an idea of what the transformational or awakening cycle is like. That is, what are the stages and where are you at in them? So you're able to locate yourself at a particular point. And then you have a better idea of what you're doing when it comes to cultivating and developing yourself so you continue to move on. So for us, most of our awakening, it's a natural thing. And we're not thinking about, well, this is this stage, blah, blah. But it's important to understand that because it's just like life. Life has stages. And of course, you're going to know the stage of life you're in. And some people put down old age as, oh, this is terrible. You bought into the Western system, or you haven't treated yourself so well, so you're in the pain period where everything's hurting you and everything else, which may happen anyway, but usually if you take care of yourself, no pain, you know what I mean? But this is like the reaping period, old age. But then there's the infancy, there's the embryo stage, you know, there's the adolescent stage, there's, you know, the manhood and womanhood stage, and the middle age stage. All of these stages are stages of life. Well, in consciousness, there's stages in consciousness. And we've tracked it, myself and Bunalela Wabogo, and it's helped because then we're able to take people and get them to see where they're at in the continuum and then help them go to the next level. So in the sixfold stages training, people will be at different stages. It's just like a relationship. You get into a relationship, consciousness will probably not all be the same, though it's good if there's some general shared things when it comes to consciousness, for example. But the point is, in the sixfold stages, it's a matter of starting with where people are at and working with that. And so a key thing then in the sixfold stages is that the overall thing is this. When someone has really done this work on identity transformation, you'll never hear the word healing coming out of their mouth, in that they will be saying, I need healing. You won't hear that because whatever issues they have, they will have worked on it. It doesn't mean it's perfect. You'll always, and in fact, in this system, if you don't continue to work on yourself, it's like working out. If you don't continue to work out, then your body can regress back to the state it was in before, or even worse. And so it's the same with this system. It's a system that, you continually work with yourself on, but it's something that you want to do. It's a joyful thing. So the sixfold stages to mental freedom is ultimately the path to real freedom: mental, spiritual, physical. And it is the basis for you really being able to engage in a strong political, social, economic struggle for transformation of a society, because it starts with you. That was the point that was made last week, that this healing stuff has to be systems that we can use for a community. So we use it for ourselves, but it's so we can use it to help our communities. Slavery and colonialism brought in certain forces that were designed to take us out of our history. Now, it's not really true that people stopped making history. As long as you live, you're making history. But the thing is, now you have someone in power that can give their version of what you're doing. And they've got the power to blast that all over the world and make it look like that's what you're doing. And so they create an image of you, which we know through slavery was the image of savagery and colonialism. And so even when you do resistance, the European has had a way of trying to downplay the resistance. The Battle of Ottawa, which was a great victory for Emperor Menelik, where he defeated the Italians after he had lined up with the Italians and defeated the British. And this is the main reason that Ethiopia didn't face colonialism until Mussolini, and that was just a brief period. It's the only country in Africa that really didn't undergo colonialism. People say there were a couple of others. This was the one. But the West would like to downplay that or eliminate it. So it's not that the Ethiopian didn't make history, they got their version of it. So that's part of the power that comes when you get power over people's present, you manipulate the image of their past. And the real problem is when the people who are being oppressed start to believe it. So sixfold stages for mental freedom, as I pointed out last week, arose out of resistance movements. It came out of struggles to free our people. And in the course of that, to free our mind. And so that's people making history. And so that is the key thing about the sixfold stages to mental freedom. It is a phase of freeing our minds from mental incarceration caused by slavery, plantation thinking, freeing our minds from the colonial mentality. And so that comes through understanding the stages that we're going through and applying this to our lives. And so in Africa, it also comes through understanding how Africa created the miseducation that leads to colonialism, at least leads to them having people that will cooperate with them in colonialism and will become the leaders at the end of colonialism. And we know that was through missionary education. What Europeans succeed in doing is creating an African middle class. Islam didn't succeed in doing that. The Europeans did. They failed at first, but then they learned how to do this. And they learned that the main way that you're going to create a group of people who are trained to think in a Western mode, who are usually going to embrace their religion and who are going to model their societies after the European nation state. So how do you do this? They learned at first that the first way they tried wouldn't work, which was to have the missionaries come in and do this on their own. They learned the way to do this was to train the Africans to train the Africans. And that became the method for creating an assimilated elite, which is what the middle class was trained to be, an imitation of Europe. It doesn't mean that a middle class had to imitate Europe, because the Japanese were able to go out and get the technology of the European and still be Japanese. But Africans too often confused culture with modernization. They confused European culture with certain techniques, industrialization, gunpowder, shipping, being able to make your own, construct your own ships. When in fact, that's a technique. You don't need to take on the culture of your oppressor. But if they're colonizing you, then they have the opportunity to take your children and miseducate them. And so that becomes the process for creating the African middle class. And it's this group that leads African independence movements. Now, they had some skills you needed, but the mentality that they had was a mentality of the West. And so Africa found themselves in a trap with independence of not questioning the models and the mentality, the culture, not questioning the model, the European nation state, not questioning the mentality of assimilation that had come along with it. A lot of the things they learned that was not useful. Their religion, very often, their literature, which is interesting to read. Don't take it serious. Shakespeare, for example, he's good for the European, but what do Africans need with Shakespeare? So that was the way it was done in Africa. And this is what has to be uprooted, along with subsequent miseducation. We've had the myth that the way it was done in the US was through Willie Lynch. That got popularized in the Million Man March. Menu Ampin was on the show a while back, and we mentioned that he wrote the little book on the myth of Willie Lynch, showing there was no Willie Lynch. This is pure bull. You know what I mean? I knew it, but he did the research, and very good research too. And so when Blacks found that out, then I'd hear them saying, oh yeah, but the same thing happened. You know what I mean? Meaning that Willie Lynch, the proposition was they pitted light-skinned blacks against dark-skinned blacks. They just generally brainwashed us in a whole lot of different ways. Now, if you're a historian, you know there was a cultural war on the plantation. Africans people who were enslaved, they were Africans. They had their own culture. And then they recreated a culture here. And so it was not no simple thing of them just coming in and dropping stuff on us, and we suddenly became brainwashed. And in fact, we created a culture in slavery. And in fact, even a lot of house slaves didn't buy into this. A lot did, but some didn't. Some poisoned their masters. Some joined in rebellion. And there was many house slaves that escaped as field slaves, and they usually escaped together. And the person in the house, they had relatives, sometimes a mother and father, or a sister or brother working in the field. So yes, there was brainwashing in the house, but there was also blacks in the house who didn't have a house mentality. But the key point is, yes, the house was a place where some of these early assimilated mindsets are created. There's a brother named Harold Cruz who wrote a book called Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And he makes the important point that there are two streams in African-American history. One is the stream of nationalism, the other is the stream of integration. And while I think it's more complex than he thought, basically that book was a classic because he hit on something. That is true, up to a point. Frederick Douglass, he lists as a representative of the assimilationist camp. Now, he was a good person. He was anti-slavery, particularly prior to the Civil War and during the Civil War. and a brilliant man. And his writings are well worth reading. And so he makes, but he saw the end result for us as just being fully Americanized, you know. When he was asked who was he says, I'm a man. But then you had Martin R. Delaney. Martin R. Delaney, who I've mentioned before, one of the most brilliant minds produced in the 19th century. Last week when we were talking about Juneteenth, he was one of the people that was plotting well ahead of the Civil War of how it would go, and then putting pressure on Lincoln, and eventually met with him to get permission to recruit Blacks into the Union Army. This is the truth. You had these two arms, you know, one was nationalism, one was integration. And we made the point with Menu Ampin that with King and Malcolm, they resolved that. You may not know it, but one part of the nationalist wing was an immigrationist wing, the Garvey wing. I was in that wing at one point, believed that we would return home. Physically, I believe that. And I came to realize it's not happening, and realize that we got to Africanize this reality and change it, along with other forces in this country. We're not going to do it by ourselves. So a new synthesis was worked out in the 60s. And that synthesis, I think, is implied by a lot of the radical Black youth that has come up now. They're not so much raising the question, are we leaving or staying here? That ain't an issue for them. They're basically raising questions about systemic problems in the society. And some of them are radicals and revolutionaries, some of them, you know. So we've reached a new juncture for our people. But in the United States, the first era of assimilation comes through house slaves, and then later the Black middle class, but not all of it. Because a part of the Black middle class defects and commits what Amilcar Cabral calls revolutionary suicide, meaning they abandon the role that the system had planned for them to support their people. Kwame Ture, you saw on one of the DVDs on Return to the African Mother Principle, Male and Female Equality. You should watch that one. That's one of my favorites because Kwame's in it. I'm shaking his hand and talking to him. At the end, I give him a book, there's pictures. In fact, you look at the promotional leaflet, it's me and Kwame Ture. I treasure that leaflet. It's a good friend of mine. This is a brother who could have got a PhD from Harvard, paid, you know, they were going to give him a full scholarship. He was a very smart man, you know. He went to one of these elite high schools in New York. His people come from Trinidad. He was born in Trinidad, but raised here. But Kwame chose the path of revolution. His motto, as I pointed out before, ready for the revolution. That was Kwame, you know what I mean? He defected from the role that the system assigned to the middle class. Ella Baker did. A whole host of Blacks have. It ain't a whole lot, but some have. And some may not be revolutionaries. They may be progressives, but their commitment is for the freedom of their people, you know? So they have Reverend Barber that you see who has been putting pressure on the Republicans and the moderate Democrats to back this voting rights legislation and others. He's an example of that, you know, good man, you know. He doesn't sound like a revolutionary to me, but he sounds like somebody who's fighting for our people. And that's good, you know. So, but in the United States, we have this myth that Willie Lynch came along and suddenly we just got white. Oh, really? You know what I mean? Really? The truth is, and I'm not going to go into the details of this, but we usually, people run around here giving this misinformation, don't read enough, you know, don't read, don't lead, please, you know, please. Hit some books in depth. Don't be giving people misinformation. I tell you about me, don't accept what I say, check it out. Follow the truth. And I tell you, I do my homework. but I'm to be corrected. And I like criticism. You know what I mean? So follow the truth. But the key point is this: most people ain't heard of this. After the plantation, where the house was a main place where they could incubate a few brainwashed blacks, you had some in the field, but not too many. That's where your culture was created. Imagine a new African culture and an art form created by the masses. You hear me? Grassroots Black people created this culture. What kind of people are these? Bad. In our culture, that means good. Don't misinterpret it. I mean bad. You hear me? Huh? The classical art form in Europe was created by an elite. Most cultures, Chinese, Confucius, elite. He was a good man. He's looking out. He was the first Chinese teacher to teach the masses. You know what I mean? And it was ethical. Emperors used it to maintain order. But the fact is, highly ethical system. But it's still an elite, which is okay. I'm not knocking it. But I'm saying it's your grassroots here that created the popular culture and the art form. And I should point out both the popular art form and the classical art form. Jazz, baby. Huh? Everyday Black people. Why? Because they were the most African. That's why. You hear me? And as my good friend Catherine John, who is Jamaican living in the United States, she's pointed out to me that they have a saying in Jamaica that the culture comes from the dirt, meaning it comes from everyday Black folks. You hear me? That's who woke me up. So I ain't got no sense that I'm smarter than the people. When the people make a decision, Black people make a decision, it is usually right. I may not like the nuances. Black people decided to back Biden in South Carolina. He was by far my favorite candidate. I didn't have any really, but Bernie Sanders was the best one. He hadn't won anything. But I understood why Black people did that. They were looking for somebody to whip Trump. I understood that. And the priority was to whip Trump. Black people smart. You hear me? Stacey Abrams with her bad self over there in Georgia and the other sisters, you know what I mean? Black people got some smarts. So I had to follow the wisdom of the people. You hear me? Huh? So we have these two streams. But what we don't understand is that in the United States, the system tried after slavery, during Reconstruction, to create a form of assimilation so they could manage the Blacks who they wanted to work the plantations under sharecropping. You don't know about this. I bet you hardly anybody listening to this knows about the Mohonk Conference. Those who do, put up in here on this chat thing, right on the side right now, you do, and tell me what it was. Write it in. Most of you don't. You hear me? This was a conference. There were two of them, one in 1890 and the second one in 1891. The 1891 one was held in Lake Mohonk, June 3rd through 5th, 1891. Now, this is an important year because this is the time of post-Reconstruction. Guess who was chairing it? The person who put the noose around your neck. Rutherford B. Hayes, who had been president under the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. He had actually got fewer votes for president than Tilden did, but what happens is he, through a deal cut, when the vote goes to the House of Representatives, the deal is cut for him to be president, and most of you know this, on condition that he withdraw what was left of federal troops. Almost all federal troops had already been withdrawn. and that he appoint, this is generally not pointed out, I've mentioned this before, that he would appoint 2 Southerners to the Supreme Court. And so they put the nail in the coffin for civil rights for Black people, and that was done. Rutherford B. Hayes is chairing this conference. The person who put you back into slavery, he's chairing it. The purpose of the conference, and by the way, there had been 6 Mohawk conferences on the Native Americans, 6. They did 2 on us. One was held in Mohawk, and another area out in Utica the year before. The 6 on Native Americans was to figure out what they're going to do with the 10% that has survived extermination, But these 2 conferences, they were on the education of Blacks, and no Black person was permitted to attend this conference. General Armstrong was the major spokesperson, and Armstrong was the teacher of Booker T. Washington. Armstrong was the person that pushed industrial education. And so the purpose of the Mohawk Conference and the one before it was to do what Africa did with the missionary training. And I'll give you the essence of this, and I'm going to give you the essence of the conclusion of this, because it's not what you think. The essence of this was, Armstrong, I've read all the documents. The book I'm finishing now goes into this conference in great detail in the chapter that looks at 6-fold stages. I got a 100-page chapter on that. Whereas the integration chapter, it's 20 pages. The Art of Leadership, Volume 2, it's 20 or 25 pages. But when you go through the 6-fold stages to mental freedom, you're going to get a lot more than that, because you're going to get the transformational system. But the point is, Armstrong addresses the conference. And by the way, the attendees were asked, why weren't any Blacks invited? Like, say, Booker T. Washington or Du Bois. Why weren't they invited? And their answer was, you did not invite the patient to the operating table or to the consultation room where the doctors are planning the surgery. You're just the patient. Well, there's a problem. This is not surgery. And even then, patients normally, except during slavery where they performed all kinds of experiments on you, the patient is asked, do you want the surgery? Answers are given, what's the percentage of the chances of surviving? What's the outcome? What's the worst? What's the best? Blah, blah. There's no consultation at all, because this is new slavery. So Armstrong addresses the conference, and this is what he says. Because this is the problem they were addressing. He said, the problem with the Negro, remember Negro, is that they don't want to work. And he says there's a reason. It's a good reason. Because they've been forced to. Remember, when your enemy is getting ready to really do you in, they get sophisticated. You understand? At least they give you a little truth. They're not giving you the truth, but they're giving themselves the truth, that they formulate a strategy they hope that will work to get us to work for them. So what he says is, in constructing an educational policy for the Negro, our task must be to get him to willingly work for us. Willingly. You get this? In other words, slavery was involuntary. Now what we have to do under this myth that we're free, because basically slavery was restored through sharecropping, what we need to do is create a situation where they want to. That's his proposal. And so the Mohawk Conference sets out 2 objectives: to train teachers and preachers. Those are the people who are going to be the agents for assimilating the Black masses. Because if you're going to get the Black masses, who are the ones who are going to be the ones to, pick the cotton voluntarily, whereas they were picking it before involuntarily, then you've got to get a new type of teacher and a new type of preacher that will get them to be submissive to this system. That was basically Mohawk. Now, some people haven't read this as well as they should have, and these are some of our scholars, because a few of our scholars have read this, not many, a few have, but they have missed the real subtlety of this conference because they ain't studied African-American culture. And this is the real key. Sixfold stages of mental freedom. African-American culture is right alongside African culture when it comes to freeing your mind. So there's a lot of other testimony at this conference. I read the whole manuscript. And so it's interesting, for example. So Armstrong is proposing industrial education as the system to get Blacks who are trained as teachers, especially, to train other Blacks. In other words, the ones who will get a college degree will be in industrial education, and then their job is to persuade the masses of Blacks to go along with this new sharecropping order. And through this, what they call industrial education. Now, what did Armstrong mean by industrial education? He didn't mean training people in industry. He didn't mean factories. They didn't have any factories. He meant work. He led Hampton Institute. By the way, Hampton's turned into quite a university. My wife's husband, graduated from Hampton. He had a degree in engineering and architecture. There is no university in the United States that has even thought of that. You hear me? Engineering and architecture. Built his own house in Seattle, Washington, and was an interior decorator. Because Black people believe in controlling the whole thing. In ancient Kemet, builders were astronomers, were priests, were also doctors. You know what I mean? We come out of a different system here. But the point is, for General Armstrong, the students at Hampton, they had one job: work. And then you get a degree. You get a degree in work. We didn't need a degree for work. We built the place. You know what I mean? What kind of mess is this? You know? So Booker T was trained in this. But I'm just going to say in a minute, Booker T didn't go along with this completely. There's a book he wrote called Work. Ain't nobody read. You need to go read it. And you'll see Booker T was subverting that model. Yeah, he went along with segregation. I'm no defender of Booker T. But underneath, he was also financing lawsuits against segregation. But he did negative things in the Congo. He sent people into the King Leopold's Congo, where they chop an arm or a leg off for nothing, to give people advice on agriculture. He did some stuff that was not good. But he saw Tuskegee as a self-reliant institution. Everything in Tuskegee, even though he got money from philanthropists, was built by Blacks. Every building was built by Blacks. And what he was trying to do was to create an independent Black business class. And if you read Harold Cruz's Christ of the Negro Intellectual and a couple other books he's written, he shows how he basically helped to set up Harlem. You know, so he had some business aspirations. He was trying to undermine the system at the same time. But the key point is this: industrial education was not industrial, it was work. And when I'm reading the manuscript, it's very interesting conversations that occur. And one of them is, it's a white woman, she's a missionary. She's come in to educate Blacks. This is what happened, the end of slavery. And so she's trying to convert Blacks to industrial education until she runs into a Black elder. And you know what he says? He raises a question. Why is industrial education only for Black people? Why is it only for Black people? And that throws her for a loop. And she ends up in this conference, and she ends up proposing industrial education for white people. But the key point he's making is, yeah, I ain't proposing it for you because it ain't no good. But what is underneath this is this elder is a part of a very important institution that came out of Africa that survived through slavery and after. It's been weakened now, it's still there. The institution of elderhood. And it's telling you that the elders were telling the younger people, beware of this. This isn't really good for us. So you always get the argument between Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois, classical education versus industrial education. Well, there was a bigger discussion going on. So that's the first thing. In the side discussions, these are the discussions that come up during the Mohawk Conference. And I'm explaining this to explain how the system, the people in charge, tried to create a new Black middle class and what actually happened. Okay, it's not what you think. So in the course of discussion, Armstrong makes another comment when he is talking about getting Blacks to voluntarily work as sharecroppers. He said, we got another problem out there. That thing that Black people are worshiping is not Christianity, it's voodoo. It's voodoo. That's the first thing he says. And then there's another comment made at this conference, and our scholars have missed this because they don't really look at African-American culture, so they didn't really appreciate what this was saying. And it was this. They said, we've got another problem. We've got this problem of elders, the very thing that I just mentioned, the elders saying that industrial education is only for us, so it can't be that good. They're not giving it for whites. One presenter makes the point that these old elders are a problem. What we need to do through this new education that we're setting up is to create a group of new elders, meaning elders who are following the golden rules as laid down in their book, Christianity, that's laid down in those teachers who are trained to get people to undergo voluntary servitude. That's what he's suggesting. So I'm going to tell you this, because you don't study your own culture. Some of you do, most of you don't. You don't know. Grassroots Blacks largely defeated this. They largely defeated this. In other words, Blacks, when they constructed the Black church, that's not what you think. They dropped African culture into it. We're going to go into this another time. They defeated this effort to create a class of preachers who were trained in the white system. Now, you'll say they've done that now through college, where people get degrees in divinity. Yeah, they have. They have that. King was one of them. And King underwent a transformation in spite of it. But we have others who have come out with that mentality. That didn't work then. We have some now. But the fact of the matter is, that's a minority within the Black church. That's a minority. The key point is the grassroots. What the people who were carrying out the Mohawk Conference did not appreciate is the grassroots had constructed a culture in slavery. That culture in slavery, a part of it is what they called voodoo. Those were the diviners and others, and what we practiced for 246 years before we embraced any Christianity. When we embraced it, this is what we embraced. So my point is sixfold stages to mental freedom. You need to understand this history. And you need to understand that while at this point, the Mohawk Conference wasn't all that successful in doing what it wanted to do. Yeah, Blacks had to do sharecropping. Blacks didn't like it. It was no voluntary submission. And when they could, they got out of it. You understand? But the point is, the grassroots had created a culture that was telling them what to do. They weren't listening to no Mohawk Conference. And a Du Bois, who at one point is at one stage of seeing himself through the eyes of others because he had been miseducated at Harvard, at another point is becoming much more conscious. The Du Bois of the 30s, who was supporting cooperative economics and who admitted that he was wrong in some of the stances he took on Garvey, and Garvey was wrong in some of his stances he took on Du Bois. That's a discussion for another point. But Du Bois undergoes change and transformation. That's because he's also listening to what the people are saying. Du Bois's Souls of Black Folks is a classic because he, one, identifies double consciousness, seeing yourself through the eyes of others. But the other is when he's teaching at Fisk, he is going out into the rural areas of the South, and he's seeing African-American culture. He loved the spiritual blues. He loved them. He had insights into the culture that were quite deep. So he was being pulled in both directions. But because he had integrity, he was pulled more in our direction, So this thing has been a lot more complex than you actually think. So the Mohawk Conference is one example. And of course, now, since the external forces have hit our community, some of us have gone out on a white trip: individualism, materialism, misogyny, violence, And so these are things that sixfold stages to mental freedom have to address. Now, there are some Blacks you ain't going to be able to save. I'm sorry, Some of them have gone off on the deep end, some of them, but they're few. The majority of our people are looking for answers. And one of them, because the answers come from us, not me, not from single people. But when it comes to this healing part, it's all about love. And love is about knowledge of self, and knowledge of self is based on respect. So one is the key to the other. So sixfold stages to mental freedom is really key. And the youth who have been caught in these forces that have put them in the position of choosing between two cultures, they're caught in this difficult position. I was talking to Janae Johnson's husband, the sister I spoke about at the beginning of this show. He's a counselor, and he counsels a lot of Black men coming out of prison. And he was speaking to the quandary, because the courts mandate a lot of times when guys get out of jail, they got to go for counseling. And so he's providing good counseling, but he's making the point. In the end, what are they faced with? They get some counseling. But in the end, because they have a criminal record, they're put in a position where it's going to be very difficult for them to get a job that in any way they can raise a family on, Any way they can even pay rent, let alone a mortgage to support a family along with a wife. Any way to marry, And so the system is set up for them to go back into prison. And he knows it, and he's trying to do his best with this. And so one of the things we have to do is fight to see that those so-called criminal records, too often of which had to do with nonviolent crimes, too often when the drug war, which has started really by Nixon making marijuana use and possession illegal, and then Reagan and Clinton and the rest of them, Bush, people are being put in jail for stuff that when white people start doing it, suddenly it's, opiates. And so people need treatment now, like they used to get before when they had a problem of drug addiction. And a lot of people in jail just for possessing marijuana. And even though the crack, cocaine, the powder cocaine thing, the disparity is supposed to have been, narrowed. The fact is, ain't nobody who's on drugs should be in jail. You know what I mean? Somebody's addicted, they need treatment. You put somebody into jail for drinking alcohol, it can be more dangerous than, particularly marijuana. In fact, marijuana is being used now legally for people who have health issues and stuff like that. It was all about locking Black people up and brown people. And it was all about politicians being able to use this as a campaign slogan, to get into office and to hold office. So sixfold stages to mental freedom is about freeing your mind, but using it so that you can use this to change conditions in your community. I know some of the people that get into this are already engaged in struggle, but this will heighten your struggle. I pointed out in the integration trap that one of the weaknesses of a lot of Black freedom movements in the 60s, I'm talking about Black liberation movements, including Black Panther Party, a number of others, they didn't have this system. Malcolm underwent it. The Nation of Islam had a religious transformation system, but they didn't have the system Malcolm had, which was political, economic, social, historical, as well as religious and spiritual, which he drew from the nation. And that put him on a collision course with the messenger. He wasn't conscious of it because he was doing natural study while he was in prison that was, helped to deepen his consciousness. That was the secret to how bad he was, And so that's what this is about. And this is why I'm doing the show, because college is fine. Some of you are college graduates, some of you are not. College is fine for people that need it. Whatever kind of education you get is fine. But Western education is not about transformation. And that is the key. That's what life is about, growing, transforming. And so the sixfold stages to mental freedom are like key to that. That will be linked to history, to culture, to politics. That'll be linked to day-to-day life in the community. There's a whole method we use for this. You'll get it when you go through this. It's one that I went through, and a lot of other people I've taken through. Now, the key thing to understand, and I'm going to end on this, is summarizing the 6 stages. Now, people who buy the integration trap, I sent them a little 40-page summary of this. And people who sign up for this, we may well arrange for you to get this. And there's a thing I did on Philippe Matthews, which is 6 days of introduction to the sixfold stages to mental freedom. Don't think that when you get that, you got everything, so you don't need the training. That's surface. It could only be surface. And it's not transformative. It's just giving you information. And if you think information alone is transformational, that's because you're in the teaching trap that I talked about last week, whereas information is the basis for miseducation, even when you're getting the right information. Because without transformation, when you're using the Western system for education, which is to separate knowing from being, so you can know some Black stuff, some African stuff, but if you don't know how to take this to be this, you're going to end up being whatever you were before. And so you'll be talking Black and walking white, you know what I mean? Which means acting white. Kemet, they said, speak truth, do truth. This is a system where knowing and being merge. And this is only one of a number of systems, because the brother asked before, do we have systems? Yes. This one is for identity transformation. There's another one for mastery transformation. That's the book I'm working on now. And that has to do with your destiny. This one has to do with your identity. That is, how do you identify yourself in the world? Are you African, African American, Black? Each of those mark a definition of identity. Or do you want to be something else? So identity is key. And if you've got identity straight, it's going to be easier for you to pursue your gifts and in a rewarding way. Because as we pointed out in the sixfold stages to mental freedom, we are here basically to serve something higher than ourselves, but through our gifts. We all have gifts. So different people have different gifts. Use your gifts. But the only way they're really worthwhile is when you're using it in service to humanity, to your people and to humanity, to Mother Nature, to the environment. That's part of humanity, you know. So the sixfold stages is at the foundation. Kemet didn't have to deal with that as long as they were in control of their own societies. They didn't have somebody else coming in imposing their identity on them. But we face that, and now with great confusion due to all the other forces that have hit us. So the end result of this is knowing yourself and loving yourself, and then going higher and higher. That's the goal in life. So I'm going to list the stages of consciousness, and we've tracked them, and pretty well people fit into one of these or they're transitioning between them. And when you understand them, you're able to figure out where you are in the continuum and then understand better how you can go deeper into whatever stage you're in. And then if you choose to, transition to the next one. Now, some of this happens automatically and you don't really know what you're experiencing fully. So for people who have experienced this, then it will help you to understand the experiences you've gone through. And then what's next? It's up to you what you do with that. And I should say about transformation in anything, people go as far as they want to go. So if you're at a certain point and you're satisfied, then that's where you stop. This is also true in the mastery system when we get into this at another time. Some people get to a certain point of mastery and they don't want to go any further. And so that's where they end up. That's okay. That's your choice. So it's your choice to make. But generally, growth is continuous. You know, growth is continuous. So what are the sixfold stages? First of all, these are stages of awakening. These are experiences. So I can describe the stages. You won't really understand them unless you're going through the experience. The first stage is parallel, meaning some people are in one stage, some people are in the other stage, okay? The stage just mentioned, assimilation. That's a stage. Some Black folks are in this. The assumption made by the Willie Lynch syndrome thought and others is that all of us went through that. If so, that would mean we don't have a culture. Because assimilation is seeing yourself through somebody else's eyes. It's taking on their culture, even though it's impossible to be them. You know, that's assimilation. For culture to be wiped out, you have to wipe the people out. As long as the people are alive, their culture is going to persist and exist. And the assimilated are going to be a minority. So, you know, assimilation is taking on someone else's culture, seeing yourself through the eyes of others. There's a lot more, but that's one stage. So some of our people in that stage, I was in that stage. Malcolm X was in that stage. Amilcar Cabral, the guy in the background there with sunglasses, he was in that stage. Parallel to this is the stage of Black identity. Black identity is describing a stage of consciousness shaped during enslavement, when Blacks made a choice to forge a culture inside this country. And the defining point was Blackness, because Blacks recognized that we're oppressed based on the color of our skin, not tribe, because by then we had lost a memory of what ethnic group we came from. Europe, Asante, we had lost memory of that. But what we saw is what we had in common was a common oppression based on color, whatever the shade. And so that becomes Black identity. There's a lot up underneath this because African-American culture comes up underneath this. So this is a parallel state. More of our people are in the stage of Black identity than assimilation. But people who are in assimilation, certain ones of them can be put in very influential positions in this society to have a lot of influence on other Black people, you know, and to control some organizations that can have some influence on Black people. So don't minimize this assimilation thing. And there are people in the stage of Black identity that have some assimilated attitude. So I'm not saying it's pure, because there's a spectrum in the stage of Black identity, a spectrum of consciousness, very high, very low, in between, you know, but Black identity. And this forges a form of unity among Blacks. The key thing about people in the stage of Black identity is a majority of them don't want to be African, but they are and don't know it. That's a big contradiction. So that's Black identity. Now, there are two stages that lead people to move in certain directions. One is the stage of pre-disturbance. The majority of Black people who have not taken on a deep sense of consciousness in this country and in different parts of the world are people who have experienced, Black people who have experienced racism, but it has not triggered an awareness of what that means. They have experienced it in school, they've experienced it on the streets with the police, they've experienced it in the military, wherever they've experienced it. And they're aware of racism, but it has not triggered a certain reaction that is really key. And so at this stage, when a person experiences racism, their response can be confused. And when it's rebellious, it can be called confused rebellion. And this is a stage that a lot of younger Blacks experience, because if they're getting racism at the hands of a teacher, they may not be conscious of all that that entails. But they respond. They don't like it. And they respond in different ways, striking out in different ways. But the striking out may not be a conscious striking out. You know, it might be a physical striking out. It might be engaging in antisocial activity that looks like it's striking out against the system, while in fact it's the kind of behavior the system has said Blacks engage in. It could be gang activity, whatever, you know. So it's called pre-disturbance. There's a stage called disturbance. Disturbance is where a person experiences racism and it has an effect on them, a transformational effect. When we get into this, we go into how that works. So these are stages that can trigger a movement into a higher level of consciousness or stagnate. Pre-disturbance can be stagnation. A lot of people just adjusting and not really responding to racism in a positive way, that is, fighting it. The other stage, so you have assimilation, you have Black identity, pre-disturbance, disturbance, and then you have African identity. This is the stage that this show is pushing a lot. This stage is a stage where you have made a decision that you really want to deal with your Africanness. And this is a stage that not all Black people reach, because the stage of Black identity is African-based. New African culture is African-based, but a lot of us don't know it. We don't know that the worship experience in the Black church is heavily African-based. We don't know it. You know what I mean? and a lot of other things, the spirit, which drives our culture. We don't know that, of course, all human beings are spirit-based, but we have a culture that's conscious of this, that draws from this. That's a core of our Africanity. We're not conscious of this. So we'll say, I don't want to be no African. I didn't lose anything in Africa. That's the majority of our people, you know what I mean? Who are in the stage of Black identity. So African identity is the stage where you embrace being African. And that's got stages to it. There's levels to it. You understand? And this was the stage you were in, even though before colonialism came, there was no concept of Africa. You were Yoruba, you were Asante, whatever. That comes later, this idea of African consciousness. And then it's you, when you create your culture, you come up with Pan-Africanism, one Africa. That comes from you in the United States and Africans in the Caribbean, particularly Trinidad. They produce some of the strongest Pan-African thinkers and conscious people. Eric Williams, who was president, who wrote the classic work, Capitalism of Slavery. So they produced that, Pan-African, all Africa, one Africa. We identify with the whole of it. So when you reach the stage of African identity, that's a part of what you're dealing with. And people in the stage of Black identity at crisis points, they identify with Africa also, Go in Black church and see how many people, particularly on certain occasions, wearing African clothes, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So African identity. And then the highest stage is revolutionary African consciousness. Very few are at this stage, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The conditions for revolution are not exactly right. If you're talking about changing society. But Malcolm reached that stage. King reached that stage. Ella Baker was at that stage. Assata Shakur, I'm at that stage. These are things that you don't just wake up and say, I'm a revolutionary. This is a transformational process. And I think one of the advantages I get by being at this stage, I'm thinking on another plane. I'm thinking outside the system. You do that with African identity, but at the stage of revolutionary African consciousness, you're thinking about alternatives to the system. You are thinking about creating systems. That's why this six-fold stages is important. This is the stage for freeing the mind. Free the mind, you free the behind. You understand? This is the stage. And the cool thing about our culture is, I pointed this out before, what will be good when you have a new society is good right now. It's a society you're living right now. You can live this right now. You understand? And so the six-fold stages, I use this in my life all the time, especially the revolutionary stage, but also the stage of African consciousness, because the more you learn about Africa, the more you can, work it into yourself. And so you're not under the stress. As I pointed out before, I ain't stressed, baby. I got an antioxidant score of 93,000. I pointed this out once before. Look at me. I'm 81 going on 82. I don't have a pain in my body. You hear me? Not a pain. That's because I take care of my health. If you love yourself, you'll take care of yourself. You got all these kinds of people talking about loving themselves and ain't doing anything to really maintain a healthy body. What's that with? You know what I mean? Huh? I got an antioxidant score of 93,000. I mentioned this in an early show. Most of you don't know what this is. This is a test that only a few hospitals are administering now. If I remember that I was going to bring this, I would have brought my wallet because I had the picture of a little machine. Highland Hospital does the antioxidant test. My cousin managed 2 wings of Highland Hospital, and she told me that they do it. I went and took this test a couple of years ago. You put your thumb on a machine, and what the machine does is measure whether you have free radicals or not. If you got free radicals, you're in trouble, It measures the amount of fruit and vegetables in your system. It measures true age as opposed to chronological age. It measures your ability to resist illness, which is presence or absence of free radicals. The score is 0 to 50,000. 0 up. Most people in this country are in the D area, you know. So 0 to 50,000. 50,000 is an A. I'm 93,000. 7 short of double perfect. And they ain't never seen a score like this. I went in because a friend of mine had had serious cancer and had overcome it through nutritional therapy. One of the brothers that's going to be training you in the 6-fold stages to mental freedom. So he had me come down because he thought I could buy a lot of, nutrition. He'd make a little money. I went down to take the test. You know what I mean? See what's happening. By the way, there's a formula to this that really puts you in this score range. And the formula is prolonging life, because people reach this kind of score, it means that you slow down the aging process. That's the key thing, because you shouldn't be aging at the level you are right now. You should be living well beyond the age that people live. By the way, in slavery, you had enslaved Africans living to 123, 126 years of age. So all this woe is me. Yeah, average age was 50, 52. Whites was not much more than that either. But what happens is enslavement. People come in with medicinal practices. First of all, they know what herbs do. You know what I mean? Well, George Washington Carver had that gift, communicating with plants. That was a Twa gift, by the way. They are the healers of the planet. You know, they introduced medicine. So there's a secret to this. I pointed this out in one of my early shows. A lot of people haven't picked it up, so I'll give it to you. Because going through the 6-fold stages of mental freedom, I love my health, baby. I don't let anybody put anything in my way that's gonna hurt my health. I don't drink, I don't smoke. I ain't knocking people who do. Smoking really is no good for you, and drinking kills brain cells. Brain cells. We only use a few percent of them anyway. You can't afford to lose any of them, even though you ain't using many. You could use a lot more. You know what I mean? Huh? So one of the first things I did, because I love myself, I've gone through this transformational process. I studied good 50 years ago. What's the secret to longevity? And unless you've heard this, you don't know the answer to this. You don't. And I'm telling you, because I know people who are into health therapy and health care, and they give all the advice to health, and some of them look pretty good. But you ask them and they'll tell you, oh, exercise. Vegetarianism. I was vegetarian for 7 years. Vegetarian's okay, but I got off of it. A healthy attitude, that's what they'll say. You know, healthy attitude, you know. But I studied the only study in the world that really reveals the secret to longevity. And guess what? Longevity is living past 100 years of age. And that's my objective. I'll be 82 in August. I'm as strong as I was in my 20s. I'm slower. That's an aging process. But when it comes to a fight, I can move real fast, you know. And I'm never tired. This is a real key thing. Now, if I was doing construction worker stuff, maybe, but I do a lot of work, mental and some physical. Never tired. Why? It was a study done, it's a 20-year study on rhesus monkeys. Monkeys are very close to human beings, 20-year study on longevity. And what did it show? It showed that if you have a calorie intake of an average of 1,400, now most will tell you who are into nutrition, that's a starvation diet. That is what the Israelis have the Palestinians on. But that's a starvation diet if it's not nutritionally balanced. But if it's nutritionally balanced, green and yellow leafy vegetables, no more meat than this, fruits, it's a balanced diet, then what happens is this prolongs your life expectancy by 30%. 30%. So if your normal life expectancy is 80, eating and doing all the things you normally do, and the average Black male is in the 70s, and the average Black female is a little higher in the 70s. And so you have a lot of Blacks dropping dead before they're in their 60s. And then you have others who go a little higher. So if you do 30% to 80, then you're talking 104 years of age. And the thing is, with this, most, if not all, of this life should be without illness, because that diet keeps you out of free radicals, and free radicals is a source of disease. But if you don't love yourself, you ain't even going to be concerned about this. And I know all kinds of Black people eat all the worst food and will just tell you, you're going to die from something, smoke all they can and say, you're going to die from something. My brother said that. He's younger than me and passed on. And I'm not saying he died for just this reason. There are other reasons. But the point is, yeah, we're all going to die from something. You know what I mean? And wouldn't you want to live as long as possible in the healthiest possible condition? Do you want to disable yourself? You know what I mean? Huh? And by the way, when you smoke, your complexion changes. The color of your hair changes. I mean, that stuff gets into you. You know what I mean? Huh? I'm not knocking people who are doing this. I'm simply saying 6-fold stages to mental freedom is about knowing yourself, respecting yourself, loving yourself. And so you keep toxicity out of your life as much as possible. You're in a toxic environment. I made a point of moving to a place there would be a little heaven on earth. I figured I would not wait because I hope to get to heaven. But I've said this before, I'm like the blues that says, everybody wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die. I'm not exactly running to die. And being a revolutionary, that could be a death trip. They tried to kill me, 3 times, you know what I mean? Huh? But I've always had this idea, I'm gonna be no martyr. I'm not doing anything to endanger anybody. There's any movement that I'm leading or a part of that can be hurt. I'm not going to do that. You know what I mean? Huh? I'm going to win with no casualties. Amilcar Cabral considered if he lost 5 people in a battle, that was a catastrophe. That was terrible. He inflicted over 50,000 deaths on the Portuguese, and he had only 1,200 or 1,500, it was very few died. Why? He loved himself. He loved his people. And he didn't put his people in a position where they could be hurt. Your health is your wealth. People run around here saying that, and they spend all their time just on money, and they're broke 9 out of 10 times. You know what I mean? So 6-fold stages to mental freedom will also be giving you some tips on health, but the main thing is you take care of your own health. My wife said, she trained herself in nutrition, and she is one healthy person. Most people think I'm 20 years or less younger than I am. They think she's 30 years younger than she is. She knows how every food impacts on the body. She trained herself in this. You know what I mean? And so, she's also a professional chef, so I get some of that. But I was getting that before I married her because I knew what to eat. She knows better, so I even get better, so she can take credit. Love is also very healthy. That's the other thing. But you got to love yourself to get any love in your life. You know what I mean? So that's sixfold stages to mental freedom. So I would like for people who are interested in this, let us know. You can do it through going to my email address, OTSHAKA, Otashaka at SBC, S as in Sam, B as in boy, C, global.net, and just let me know. Or in your comment thing under the show here, I'll make a comment. Just simply say, I'm interested in enrolling in sixfold stages to mental freedom. You can give me your email address or something, and I'll send something to you. You know what I mean? Just let us know that you're interested. And, meanwhile, we're doing preparation for this. And let us know, do you want to do this twice a month or once a month? And preference for days. If you have a day or days, put it down. What's your preference so we can try and arrive at that. I told you tentatively, this will probably be $30 a session, but we haven't decided on that. Someone asked for people that can't afford, can we get some kind of stipend or donation? We can try that. We can try and get people in this show to make a donation who can afford to supplement somebody that can't. The proposal was that we go to rich Blacks. I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. And if there's some way we got our hands on some money, we would put up some scholarships for that. We would do that. Right now, this is going off my own pocketbook, this show. So that's what I have to say today. I'm sorry that Brother Kaba Kamene, we had a follow-up here, but we'll have him on another point to deal with the Twa. And the next 2 weeks, it'll be my sister, Sandrea Bradley. She's my younger sister. She'll be on the show, and we'll be talking about Kemet and the origin of astrology and astronomy. The emphasis will be on astrology, but we'll show the relationship between the two. And the reason we're doing this is so that you can have a better understanding of what you got going on inside of you. And I'm doing this takes some guts to do this, because a lot of our people think this is mumbo jumbo and will look at me like I'm crazy, and especially psychologists. But I should point out that some very good psychologists use astrology. Carl Jung is a white boy. He was into spirituality. He had some real differences with Freud. He's into astrology. And all I can tell you is, in the show we did on the Ka, where we talked about spirits in heaven picking their destiny in heaven, your astrological chart is not what you see in the newspaper, your sun sign. It's the position of planets at the time in which you were born. It's the angular relationship of planets. Planets have energies, and we track those energies. And that is your destiny compact. That's what it is. It's your personality, strengths and weaknesses, but it's also your higher powers. It's there. And for those who are suspicious of this, there's reasons, we'll talk about it in the show, but I was one of those. I am not convinced of anything unless I can see it works. I'm into rubber hit the road. As a spiritual person, God has given me the light. I've told you about that. But I knew when I got those answers, like the one for just societies or the choice between two cultures, I knew it was accurate because I could prove it. This ain't no blind faith. Though having faith in God, nothing wrong with that. So this is the key to this, is that this system, it works, it walks. You can apply it. And in the case of astrology, sixfold stages works. In the case of astrology, it really gives you a good understanding why you are the way you are. That is, what you are. there's in one of my shows, I talked about the Yoruba conception of beauty, Iwalewa, Iwalewa. It means character is beauty. It does not mean aesthetics in the Western sense of, oh, this person has got this beautiful body or looks good. No, beauty is you being who you are. You were made beautiful. That's what this is. And that's what you are. And the system has come down on you to get you to see everything else that's wrong. And so you think you're broken. Spirit's not broken. Soul's not broken. Heart, mind that we talked about before is not broken. You're whole, you know? And so this is a real tool for you, not only knowing yourself, but the people you're around. Instead of judging them, going into psychoanalysis on them and all that, you get to see people the way they are, which if you really know a person, you don't need astrology for this. You know, okay, your friend, that's the way they are. You know what I mean? And none of us are perfect. That's why we're here, you know? So that's what will be going on the next 2 weeks. My sister and I, we've been meeting, and she's very precise and stuff. And she's a poet also. It's a healing lady. So we'll be doing a team on this for the next 2 weeks. She's quite a lady, best poet in our family, you know. So I hope you get something out of this. So that's it. This was my improvisation for today. So I'm open for what anybody has to say. And I particularly like to see for people who didn't respond to the sixfold stages before, let me know if you're interested. And I see Leotori's, I'm interested in the sixfold stages of mental freedom. So either go to my email, otshaka@sbcglobal.net, and just send me a statement that you're interested, and then we'll follow up on you. Brother Adis, I have listened to dozens of informative Black channels on YouTube. This channel is by far a top 3 of those channels. May the ancestors attract more people who can use this to this great place. Thank you. And help me get more people to subscribe. And everyone that comes to this show, make sure that you subscribe. That increases our base. What I really say about those of you that watch this show, you're a very dedicated group, because a high percentage of the subscribers go and watch every show. And that's unusual on these channels. We need to get more people of all ages, but I'm particularly interested also in younger people. But I'm glad to have older people who are conscious, because you're going to be able to help with the youth, both in your community, wherever you live, and on this show as well. Underdog music, peace to the cipher. And thank you for the compliment. Quadro makes the point, the highest stage of Black consciousness is revolutionary African-centered Pan-Africanism. Thanks for this truth. Yeah, and it's a stage to be respected. Those are our people who have made this choice. Paul Robeson was a revolutionary. That was a choice. And his creativity is reflected in that. A Superman among men, as there are super women. Not that I'm into Superman, but he could do things that are truly unbelievable. Let's see what else we have here. Ed Donaldson, former student from SFSU, still fighting the battle, exchanging our country's marks. He's referring to the book, Exchanging Country Marks, which is an outstanding work on the formation of African-American culture. And I eventually hope to have the author of that book on the show so he can share his stuff. Lao Tzu. Dr. Shaka, have you read Sandra Yancey McGuire's book, Teach Students How to Learn? She places emphasis on Bloom's taxonomy. How compatible is it with traditional African pedagogy? Lao Tzu is one of the dedicated listeners on this show and obviously conscious and has read a lot. Taxonomy of Educational Objectives is a book that I critique in the chapters that introduce the European worldview or European pedagogy. Taxonomy of Educational Objectives is the standard book used for pedagogy in the United States. It was put together by psychologists because in the West now, pedagogy is ruled by psychology. And there's a reason, because psychology is a system, when it's subtly used, that can manipulate people effectively. So Dewey is the leading pedagogical thinker in the United States. And he was, among other things, a psychologist and quite sophisticated. And in fact, the conference, the Mohawk conference, where General Armstrong said the task was to get Blacks who didn't want to work to willingly want to, that is basically what Dewey's system is designed to do, through getting people to conform to the will of the group without being told to do so. So in the case of Bloom's taxonomy, it is not compatible with traditional African pedagogy. And for this reason, it only knows how to teach to the mind. It does not know how to teach to the spirit or the body. And they say so because they're trapped in Plato's pedagogy, which is glorifying the intellect, glorifying reason, and putting down intuition. And so they reduce the area that we would call intuition to emotion. And so if you are at emotion, how can you teach to that, right? That's their position. So the spirit is not included here. So taxonomy of educational objectives simply shows the failure of Western education to do the job it should be. They admit they do not have a synthetic theory for teaching to mind and body, and they have eliminated spirit as a category that's real anyway, even though all your great thinkers are access their great thoughts through the spirit realm. You hear me? So no, it's not compatible. And that's a good question, Lao Tzu. You always raise something that's important. So if anybody Black, they're trapped who are using that. That's almost poetry, huh? Anybody Black who's using that is trapped. Okay. Pamela G, peace to all. Shout out to our SFSU. Family, thank you for your continued dedication and wisdom, Brother Tashaka. Yeah, I've got a lot of beautiful students at San Francisco State, and they have put together one of the 3 best BSUs, Black Student Unions, in the history of Black Studies at San Francisco State. They put together a Black Unity Center that they got the state university system to fund to the tune of about $400,000 a year. And this is to see that Blacks can graduate early or on time and see that they're retained and don't drop out. And so it was the BSU that put this together. Brilliant group of young students. brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Some bad sisters and some real bad brothers. So I'm really proud of you. And that's my alma mater. That's where I graduated and taught. So really proud of you. And get more of your students at State to subscribe to the channel. And the BSU, they need to put people through this transformational system so they can use it not only in the BSU, but use it in the community, which is what this is for. So that looks like what we have. And so check out next week's show, which will be dealing with the Kemetic basis of astronomy and astrology and how to apply it to you, to empower you. So Hotep, and I've enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. Oh, please.